The candle is heavier than last year. She notices this within the first 100 meters, before the procession has even crossed the Plaza del Pasito, and she logs the observation the way she logs everything. Not in writing, she has nothing to write with. Both hands are committed. But in the small interior shelf where she keeps facts, she will check later. Heavier. By how much she cannot say. The wax is the same length, 68 centimeters, the same diameter, 6.5, the same supplier on Calle Mendoza, who has supplied the cofradia for 41 years and who measured this one in front of her on Tuesday evening with the brass calipers his father used. Same wick, same pale honey color at the base where the dye has not taken, and yet heavier. She accepts the observation and keeps walking. Behind her, the brass band has begun the slow march, the one her grandfather used to whistle through his teeth on the morning of the third day, and the float, the paso, is moving at the speed it has moved since before she was born, which is the speed of 48 men, taking very small steps in coordinated darkness underneath 3 tons of silver, wood, and saint. She cannot see the men. Nobody can. The skirt of the float reaches the cobbles. Only the careful rocking motion, like a boat in harbor, gives them away. She is in the 3rd row of promisseros, second from the right, and she has walked this route in this position 7 times before, the first time at 14 behind her mother, who walked it 23 times in her life, and is no longer walking it. The candle drips onto her left wrist at the place it is supposed to drip. The older women, the mayoras, warned her about this when she was small. It will burn you a little, not enough to scar. You will want to flinch, and you must not flinch. The flinch is what makes the scar, so she does not flinch. The wax lands, cools in under a second on the skin of her wrist, forms the small pale crescent she has worn home from the procession every year of her adult life. There is one already forming. The crescent is correct. The timing is correct. The candle is heavier than last year. She does not look left or right. Looking is permitted but considered slightly graceless. The point of the promesa is not to be seen fulfilling it. The point is to fulfill it. The eyes go forward, slightly down, toward the heels of the promesero in front of her, who is a man named Joaquin Revert, 53, butcher, who made his vow 9 years ago, when his daughter's fever did not break for 6 days, and then broke, and who has walked the route every June since. She knows Joaquin's heels. She has walked behind them 4 times. They scuff slightly on the left because his left hip is wrong. She has been told he will need it replaced before he is 60, and that he intends to walk the procession 1 more time before he allows the surgery. Joaquin's heels are scuffing correctly on the left. The woman to her right is wrong. The recognition does not come as a thought. It comes as a small adjustment in her peripheral attention, the way an animal notices something has moved at the edge of its visual field and turns, the ear before the head. The woman to her right should be Pilar Ojeda, 58, who took the promesa for her grandson's heart surgery and has walked it 6 times. Pilar has bad ankles and walks slightly behind the line, half a pace, which Concha is accustomed to compensating for by tilting her own pace very slightly, so the row stays even from the perspective of the band behind them. Concha has tilted. The woman to her right is not half a pace behind. The woman to her right is exactly in line. The woman to her right is not Pilar. Concha does not turn her head. The looking is graceless. She instead works the puzzle peripherally, the way her grandmother taught her to count the azulejo tiles in the cofradia chapel, without raising her chin during the reading of the names. The woman to her right is the right height for Pilar. The candle she is carrying is the right candle. The pale blue mantilla on her hair is, as far as Concha can see from the corner of her eye, the mantilla Pilar has worn since her husband died. The hands holding the candle are not Pilar's hands. The hands are younger. She keeps walking. The procession turns onto Calle Larga, where the houses have hung the long red banners from their balconies, and the women on the balconies are throwing rose petals down onto the paso in fistfuls, the way they have done since the 17th century, and the petals are landing on the silver and on the saint's blue robe and on the shoulders of the promiseros and in Concha's hair. A petal lands on the back of her left hand, sticks to the warm wax there, becomes part of the crescent. She does not brush it off. Brushing is also graceless. The promesera should accept what falls on her. She uses the turn to look. The turn justifies the head movement. She looks right briefly, with the excuse of glancing at the balconies, and her eye crosses the woman who is not Pilar and registers. In the half-second the look is permitted, a face that is exactly Pilar's face from 16 years ago. The face Pilar had at 42, when Concha was 25, when Pilar used to come to her mother's kitchen on Sunday afternoons and laugh too loud, and bring almonds wrapped in waxed paper. The face has not aged. The face is looking forward, slightly down, the eyes at the level of Joaquin's heels, as a promesera should look. Concha keeps walking. There is a procedural reason, she tells herself, and the reason is in her mouth before the question is. The cofradia sometimes allows substitutions. If a regular promesero falls ill or becomes infirm and cannot complete the walk, a family member may take her place wearing her mantilla and carrying her candle, so the promesa is not broken. It is permitted. It is rare but permitted. Pilar has a niece, Marisol, who lives in Seville and comes home for the procession. Marisol is the right age. Marisol could be wearing Pilar's mantilla. There is a procedural reason. The candle drips onto her wrist at the correct interval, 12 seconds since the last drop, and she accepts the heat and walks on, and the procedural reason settles into the shelf in her interior, where she keeps things she will check later. The third row should contain 6 promeseros. She counts without turning. She can hear them. The soft tread of 6 pairs of leather-soled shoes on cobbles, the small rustle of 6 skirts and trousers, the very faint creak of 6 candles in 6 right hands. 6, the count is correct. She is permitted, by the small adjustment of looking slightly down at her own candle, to see the shoes of the promesera directly to her left, who should be Mercedes Lorente, and the shoes are Mercedes's shoes. The brown lace-up Oxfords Mercedes has worn for 19 years, scuffed at the toe where she kicks the cobbles when she takes a long stride. The shoes are scuffing correctly. The stride is Mercedes's stride. She does not this time. Look up, the candle drips, the petals fall. The brass behind her is moving into the second phrase of the march, the slow rising one that her grandfather used to call the breath, because it is the part of the music in which the men under the paso take their longest pause between steps and the paso sways forward like an animal deciding to move. The crowd along Calle Larga has fallen quiet for the breath. They always do. The only sounds are the brass and the small bells sewn into the saint's robe, which ring twice each time the float rocks forward, once on the left side and once on the right, slightly out of phase, so that the ringing is a soft double tap that has been the same double tap since 671. 3 taps, she counts 4, she counts 5. The double tap has become a triple tap. It is so subtle that she is not sure she heard the third one, and so she counts the next one, and the next, and the third tap is there, very small, after the right side bell, like a third bell sewn into the saint's robe that she does not remember being told about. She walks. The triple tap continues. After a while she stops counting and lets the rhythm settle into her step. Her left foot lands on the first tap, her right on the second, and the third lands between her feet, in the air, in the moment when she is not touching the ground at all. The procession passes the bakery. The smell of bread that has been in the oven since 4 in the morning rises out of the open door and is overlaid with the smell of the orange blossom that the cofradia lays on the paso the night before, and the smell of the candle wax, which is honey and old smoke, and behind these the heat. The procession is in heat now. The sun is over the rooftops. It is 2:14 in the afternoon. The paso is precisely on schedule. She knows it is 2:14 because the bakery clock is visible in the door, and she allowed her eye to fall on it for the same half-second she had used at the corner. 2:14. The schedule says 2:14 at Calle Larga, number 47, which is the bakery. The schedule has held for 2 centuries. The schedule is the most reliable thing in her life. The candle in her hand is heavier. She does not mean it has grown heavier in the last minute. She means she has noticed, with the part of her attention not occupied by the bells, that it is heavier now than it was when she made the first observation at the Plaza del Pasito. Marginally, the way a glass of water grows heavier when you hold it out at arm's length and do not put it down. Her shoulder is beginning to ache, in the place the mayoras warned her about. The promesera's shoulder, they call it, the price you pay for not setting the candle down. She is paying it. She is paying it slightly earlier than she expected to. She accepts the pain and walks on. There is a small interruption ahead. The procession has paused at the corner of Calle del Aire because the capataz, the man who calls instructions to the 48 invisible men under the float, is adjusting the rhythm before the next turn. The pause is built into the schedule. It is 1 minute and 20 seconds. Concha uses it the way promeseros are permitted to use it, to lower her head, to allow her arm to rest by closing the elbow slightly, to breathe. She breathes. In the silence of the pause, with the brass band at rest and the bells silent, and the crowd holding its breath, because the capataz's voice will carry across the whole street when he speaks. She hears the third tap once more, lone without the first two. A small bell, behind her, slightly to the right. The sound has no source she can place. It does not match the bells on the paso, which are silver and bright. This one is older, duller. The sound of a bell that has been in a box. The capataz calls, the men lift, the paso moves, the procession resumes. The third tap rejoins the first two and the rhythm reasserts itself, and Concha walks. She thinks, without quite framing it as a thought, about the line of promeseros, about how the cofradia keeps the line, about the ledger. The ledger is kept in the chapel office, and it is maintained by the secretario of the cofradia, currently a retired schoolteacher named Don Esteban, who has held the post for 26 years. Every promesa made to the saint is entered in the ledger on the day it is made, with the name of the petitioner, the name of the person on whose behalf the petition is offered, the condition requested, and the term of the vow. When the term is fulfilled, when the requested healing has held, or the requested safety has been preserved for the agreed number of years, the entry is closed with the word completa, and the promesero is released from the line. The ledger is read aloud each year on the morning of the first day of the procession in the chapel by Don Esteban, and the names of the completas are recited in order. And the families of the released stand when their relative's name is called. And there is applause, which is the only applause permitted inside the chapel all year. Pilar's name was not called this year. Concha attended the reading. She stood beside her cousin and watched the names go past on the air. Pilar Ojeda's name was not among the completas. Pilar's vow is not closed. Pilar is still in the line. The woman walking to Concha's right is not a substitute, because no substitute is needed, because Pilar is not infirm, because Pilar is. Concha tries to remember. Pilar is somewhere. Pilar was at the morning mass. Concha saw her. Concha is almost certain she saw her. She remembers the blue mantilla in the third pew. She remembers thinking, Pilar has gained a little weight this year. She remembers it clearly. The woman to her right has not gained a little weight this year. The woman to her right is 42 years old. In the body she had when she used to come to Concha's mother's kitchen with the almonds wrapped in waxed paper and laugh too loud and tell stories about her husband who had not yet died. The candle drips. The wax forms the crescent. Concha keeps walking. She knows now that the procedural reason will not hold, and she places the procedural reason on a different shelf, the one she keeps for things she has told herself in order to remain inside a situation. She does not abandon the reason. She simply files it. She has done this all her life. Her mother taught her how. Concha, the world will offer you a story for almost anything, and you will not always know in the moment if the story is true, and what you must do is keep walking and not throw the story away, because sometimes the story is true and you have only not yet seen how. She keeps walking. They pass the Casa de las Camelias, where the old widows are watching from the iron balcony, all in black, the same widows who have watched from the same balcony since Concha was a concu child, 4 of them in a row like sparrows on a wire. The widows do not throw petals. The widows have a different function. The widows count. Each year, they count the promeseros aloud as the rows pass, and at the end of the procession, they meet in the kitchen of the eldest, and they compare counts, and if the count disagrees with the ledger, the cofradia is told, and Don Esteban opens the book. Concha's row is the third. As her row passes the balcony, she hears the eldest widow, Doña Amparo, 91 years old this year, count under her breath in the careful voice she uses for counting. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, seis, siete. 7. There should be 6. The third row has 6, has always had 6, has had 6 since 1882 when the Cofradia fixed the row count and stopped admitting new promissoros into rows that were already full. 6. Doña Amparo counted 7. Concha hears the count without raising her head, and the count enters her without raising her pulse, because promissoros do not raise their pulse, and she walks on. Behind her, very faint, she hears Doña Amparo count again. Uno, dos, tres, cuatro, cinco, seis, siete. The second count is the same as the first. The widows do not often count twice. Doña Amparo has counted twice this year. The third tap, behind Concha, and slightly to the right, taps with the bells of the paso. The candle is heavier. Her shoulder has begun the slow burn the mayoras warned her about. The wax on her wrist is now a long crescent that has begun to wrap toward the inside of the arm, the warm side, the side where the veins are visible under the skin, and she remembers. She had not remembered this until now. She remembers her mother showing her own wrist after the procession one year, when Concha was perhaps 11, and her mother saying, "This is where you carry them." And Concha had thought her mother meant the saint. But her mother had not been looking at the saint. The fourth row has begun to pass Doña Amparo's balcony. Concha cannot hear the count for the fourth row because the brass band has resumed. She can only hope the fourth row contained the right number. She does not know what she would do if it did not. They are approaching the long stretch. The stretch along the river, where the procession leaves the streets and walks the paseo under the plane, trees, and the crowd is thinner because the paseo is wide and the families spread out, and the promiseros are permitted, in the long stretch, to drop their gaze even further, to look at their own feet, because the paseo is straight and the float can follow itself. The long stretch is the part where Concha has, in past years, allowed herself to feel the procession, to let the heat and the brass and the wax become a single thing in her body, and to think about whoever it was she was walking for. She is walking for her son. She has not said this aloud today. She has not said it aloud since she made the vow. The vow was made 11 years ago, in a hospital corridor in Granada, in the small hours of a Tuesday morning, when the doctors had stopped using the word recovery and had started using the word comfort, and Concha had walked out of the corridor and into the chapel of the hospital, which was empty, and she had knelt and said the words she had been raised to know, and she had promised the saint that if her son lived, she would walk the procession every year of her life until the saint released her, and she would carry the candle, and she would not set it down, and she would never speak the vow aloud to anyone, because the vow was between her and the saint had taken it. Her son had lived. Her son was 23 this year. Her son was watching the procession somewhere along the route with his girlfriend, who Concha liked, and his small dog, who Concha tolerated. Her son did not know what the vow had been. Her son did not know his mother walked for him. Her son thought she walked because her mother had walked, and because her grandmother had walked, and because the women of her family walked. The candle drips. Concha has, over the years, become very precise about the difference between the things she will think during the procession and the things she will not. She will think about her son. She will not think about the night he was born, which was 23 years ago this October, and which she has reduced to a small white interior shape she does not unfold during the walk. She will think about his face. She will not think about the corridor. She will think about his voice on the telephone last week and what he said about his job in Madrid. She will not think about the moment, 11 years ago, when she made the vow and was not entirely sure she meant it, and made it anyway, because there was nothing else left in her hands to offer. She thinks about his voice on the telephone. The third tap is louder in the long stretch because the brass band has thinned out. The band marches single file under the plane trees and the sound spreads. And the small old bell behind her, slightly to her right, is now distinctly audible to her as a separate object. Tap, 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 3 taps where there should be 2. She does not turn her head. The looking is graceless. She walks on the third tap as she has been walking, her left foot on the first, her right foot on the second, and the third arriving in the air between her feet, in the small interval of her step where she is not touching the ground. She begins to suspect, in the part of her mind that suspects without forming sentences, that the third tap is being made by the woman to her right. She does not know why she suspects this. There is no candle-mounted bell. Promiseros do not carry bells. The bells are on the saint, and yet the tap is at the level of the right hand of the woman to her right, at the height a candle would be carried, and it is in the rhythm of that woman's step. The long stretch ends at the small bridge over the river, where the procession turns and begins to climb back up toward the cathedral square. The turn is the moment when the promiseros are permitted, by the geometry of the procession, to see the full line for the first time, because the paso sweeps wide and the rows are briefly visible to one another. Concha lifts her gaze with the excuse of the turn, and she sees that the third row has 7 promiseros in it. Doña Amparo had not miscounted. She sees that the fourth row has 8. She sees that the fifth row has 9, and that she does not recognize the 9th person, and that the 8th person in the 5th row is her Uncle Tomas, who has been dead for 14 years, walking with his head down and his candle held in the position he used to hold it, the slightly tilted right-handed grip of a man who broke his wrist in his 30s and never fully recovered the rotation. She sees that her Uncle Tomas's candle is the right length for a candle 1 hour into a procession. She walks on. The seeing has not changed her step. The wax has dripped at the correct interval. The shoulder is burning the way it is supposed to burn. The crowd along the route up to the cathedral has begun to applaud. They applaud the turn. They always do. And the applause is the same applause it has been for 2 centuries, the long, warm clatter of a town's hands. She thinks, I will keep walking. I will not set the candle down. I will not look right. I will not look at the row behind me. I will reach the cathedral, and I will give the candle to the priest at the door. And he will set it in the brass stand, and the procession will be over, and I will go home, and I will think about this tomorrow. She thinks this for perhaps 200 meters. Then she begins to think about the ledger. The ledger is read aloud each year on the morning of the first day of the procession, and the names of the completas are recited in order, and Concha has stood at the back of the chapel each year for 11 years and waited for the saint to release her, and the saint has not released her, and Concha has assumed the saint has not released her because her vow was not for a number of years but for the duration of her life, and she had accepted this when she made it, because that was the cost. She has accepted it. But Tomas's name was called as Completa 15 years ago. She remembers it. She was 26. Her mother stood and raised her hand in the chapel, and the family applauded for Tomas, who was alive then and at the back of the chapel, and waved his hand sheepishly because he did not like attention. Tomas's vow had been to walk 20 years for his wife's recovery from cancer, and his wife had recovered, and Tomas had walked the full 20, and the saint had released him, and Tomas had walked 1 final year as a courtesy, and then he had stopped walking. He had been completo. The ledger had been closed on his name. His wife had outlived him by 6 years. Tomas is in the 5th row. The candle drips. The crescent on her wrist is now warm, and the wax has begun to do something it has never done in any previous year, which is to remain liquid for longer on the skin. The small drop, holding its shape for perhaps 3 seconds before cooling, instead of the half second she is used to. She does not flinch. She is not in pain. The wax is warmer than it should be, but the skin is accepting it. She thinks about the candle. The mayoress told her once, when she was 18 and walking her first full procession, that the candle was the promessora's prayer. The flame was the prayer being said. The wax falling was the prayer being heard. The shortening of the candle was the prayer being completed. And the weight of the candle, which would feel almost nothing in the first kilometer, and almost unbearable in the last, was the promesira's share of what the saint was carrying for her. Her candle is heavier than last year, she thinks. The saint is carrying more. She does not know who else the saint is carrying for. She does not know whose vow is being added to her own. She does not want to know. She walks. They pass the school, where the children are out on the steps in their white shirts, and the smallest ones wave with both hands at the paso, and a teacher is trying to keep them in line and failing, and one small girl, perhaps 4, has slipped the teacher and is standing in the front row with her thumb in her mouth and as Concha walks past, the small girl looks at her, specifically the third row second from the right, and removes her thumb from her mouth and says, very clearly, Mama. The teacher catches the girl and picks her up. The girl does not protest. The teacher is apologizing silently with her eyes, in the way one apologizes to a stranger for a child's behavior. Concha does not turn her head. She does not have a daughter. She has a son. The girl is somebody's mistake. The girl is calling for her own mother, who is somewhere in the crowd, and the word has landed by accident in Concha's row. The procedural reason settles with the others on the shelf. She walks. She thinks finally, properly, who else is the candle for? She does not have an answer. She has instead the small white interior shape she does not unfold during the walk. The night her son was born, 23 years ago. The shape contains the corridor, the doctors, the words recovery and comfort, and a thing she has not told anyone in 23 years, which is that her son was born one of two, and the other one, the sister, had not lived past the first hour, and Concha had been told at the time, by a nurse who had meant kindness, that one had been taken so the other could stay. Concha had not believed the nurse then, and did not believe her now, but she had accepted the shape into which the nurse's sentence had folded her. Grief, because the shape was a shape one could carry, and Concha had needed a shape. She had given the dead child her mother's name, in private, in her own mouth, without telling anyone, and she had not spoken the name aloud since. The candle is heavier. The small girl on the school steps had said Mama. Concha keeps walking. She thinks, with a clarity she has been pushing away for an hour, that the procession is the saint's account, and the ledger in the chapel is the parish's account. And the two accounts have never agreed, and the widows on the balcony count to reconcile them. And the count is off this year because the saint is carrying promesas. The parish does not know about, and one of the promesas the saint is carrying is one Concha did not make aloud, and did not make in the chapel, and did not enter in the ledger, and has, in fact, made in her sleep every night for 23 years. She does not know what the saint is offering her. She suspects. She walks. The procession climbs the long, slow rise toward the cathedral square. The shadows have begun to shift slightly, as they always do in the third hour, the sun moving past its highest, and the plane trees throwing the first long bars of shade across the route. The promesers enter the shade and are briefly cool, and then they enter the sun again, and the wax on the candles softens, and the drip rate increases, and the mayoras on the route, the older women who do not walk but who watch from the doors of their houses, cluck their tongues and call out small instructions. Despacio, despacio. La cera, el hombro, slowly, the wax, the shoulder. Concha has begun, without permitting herself to know she has begun, to listen for one of the mayoras to call her name. She is not sure why. She does not need to be told to slow down. She is walking at the correct pace. She is carrying the candle correctly. She has nothing to be corrected for, and yet she is listening. A mayora calls. It is not her name. It is the name of the promesera in the row behind her, who has begun to lean to one side and needs to be told to straighten. The mayora tells her. The promesera straightens. Concha keeps walking, she thinks. If I look right, will the saint give her to me? The thought arrives whole. She does not unfold it. She does not examine it. She places it on a third shelf, a shelf she did not know she had until this moment. The shelf for things she has thought, and not yet decided whether she will know that she thought them. She walks. The candle drips. The third tap continues, smaller now, almost shy, behind her right shoulder, in the rhythm of a step that is matching her own. The cathedral square is visible. They will be there in 12 minutes. The route has been walked for 3 hours and 46 minutes. The schedule has held. She thinks of her mother. Her mother walked the procession 23 times. Her mother walked it the year she was pregnant with Concha. Her mother walked it after Concha was born. Her mother walked it after Tomas's wife recovered. Her mother walked it 3 weeks before she died, which was a winter death, in a different month, and the family had said at the time, at least she walked one more, and Concha had said at least, and her mother's candle from that final procession had been kept in the cabinet in the dining room, the wax preserved with the long crescent of her wrist drip still pressed into the side, And Concha had inherited the cabinet and the candle when her father had also died. And the candle had been in the cabinet ever since, and Concha had looked at it perhaps once a year on the morning of the procession, and she had not, until this moment, walking, the third tap behind her, thought to wonder who else was my mother carrying. The candle drips. She becomes aware that she is being asked something, not in words. The procession has a way of asking. It asks through the candle's weight, the wrists heat, the shoulders burn, the brass bands pause for breath, the bells triple tap, the rose petals, the widows count, the small girl's mama. It is asking her to look right. She does not look right. She has decided, without quite forming the decision, that she will not look right for the rest of the procession. She will walk to the cathedral. She will hand the candle to the priest. She will return to her seat in the family pew. She will close her eyes for the final blessing. She will go home. She will eat the cold tortilla her cousin has left for her in the fridge. She will sleep. She will think about it tomorrow. She walks 200 more meters in this decision. Then she thinks about her son. He is 23. He is in Madrid. He is at this moment, almost certainly, watching the procession on the small television in his girlfriend's apartment, because he has done this every year since he moved away. He will be eating something. He will be saying to his girlfriend, "That's my mother, that's her," the second from the right in the third row. He will not know about the corridor in Granada. He will not know about the vow. He will not know about the small white interior shape. He will not know that he was born one of two. She thinks, if I look right, what does he know tomorrow? She thinks, if I do not look right, what does she? The third tap behind her right shoulder is in the rhythm of her step. The cathedral square is 6 minutes away. The crowd has densened along the last stretch, the way it always does. The families pushing toward the front to see the paso enter the square and pass under the great arch, and the noise is greater, and the mayoras on the balconies are throwing the last of their petals, an extravagance, a last gift, and the air is full of red. Concha walks. She thinks about the ledger, about Don Esteban with his careful hand, about the word cumplida written next to a name, about what it means to be released, about what it means not to be, about the years her mother walked, and the year her mother did not walk because her mother was dead, and the candle in the cabinet that had her mother's crescent on it, and the question of whose other name was on her mother's wrist. She thinks the saint releases when she is asked. She thinks the saint also adds when she is asked. She thinks, I have not asked her to add. She thinks, I have not asked her not to. The cathedral is 4 minutes away. The brass band has begun the final phrase, the one that climbs, the one her grandfather called the climb, and the float is rocking faster now, the 48 invisible men taking shorter steps, the rhythm tightening as it always tightens for the entry into the square. The third tap is keeping up. The third tap is in her ear now, close, almost at her right elbow, almost where the candle of the woman to her right would be, if the woman to her right were leaning forward to whisper. The woman to her right is not leaning forward. Concha can tell, peripherally, without looking, that the woman is walking straight. The third tap is being made anyway. The candle drips. Concha decides. She decides between one step and the next, without warning, without preparation, in a way that her mother would have understood, and her son would not. And the decision is not a thought. It is a movement in her shoulder, a tilt, the smallest possible adjustment of the angle at which she is carrying the candle. The flame of the candle, which has been upright for 3 hours and 51 minutes, leans briefly to the right. She does not look right. She tilts the flame. The wax, which had been falling onto her own left wrist for the duration of the procession, falls now, for one drop, onto the left wrist of the woman to her right. Concha does not see this happen. She has not turned her head. She knows the drop has landed because she counted the interval, and the drop did not land on her own wrist this time. She straightens the candle. The flame returns to vertical. The next drop, 12 seconds later, lands on her own wrist again. The crescent continues. There is no sound from the woman to her right, no flinch, no exclamation. The third tap continues for one more pace and then stops. The third tap stops. The brass band climbs into the final cadence. The paso enters the square. The crowd, which has been waiting for this for an hour, releases the great applause it has been holding, the long, warm clatter that fills the square and reaches up the walls of the cathedral and reaches the bells of the cathedral, which begin to ring, and the bells of the cathedral and the bells of the paso, and the bells of the small old bell behind. Concha's right shoulder no longer separate themselves, because the small old bell has stopped. Concha walks the last 40 meters to the cathedral door. The priest is waiting at the door, as he always is, in the white and gold vestment for the closing, with the brass stand for the candles, and the promiseros come to him in order, row by row, and surrender their candles, and he places each one in the stand, and the candles burn together for the final blessing, and the promiseros return to their families. Concha hands her candle to the priest. He places it in the stand. The candle, which she had thought was heavier than last year, is now in his hands, and he does not appear to notice the weight, which means either that the weight was hers and not the candle's, or that the priest is accustomed to a weight she has not been accustomed to. She steps to the side as she is supposed to make room for the next promesero. The woman to her right does not step up behind her. The next promesero in line is Mercedes Lorente in her brown lace-up Oxfords, who hands her candle to the priest and steps aside. Mercedes does not look at Concha. Mercedes is also not looking right. Concha does not turn her head to see what is or is not behind her. She walks across the square to the family pew side of the cathedral, where her cousin is waiting, and her cousin embraces her, and her cousin says, "Que orgullo," and Concha allows herself to be embraced. Her cousin smells of the orange water that the women of the family have worn for 4 generations. Her cousin's hands are warm on Concha's back. Her cousin pulls back to look at her face, and her cousin frowns very slightly and says, "Conchita, the wax." Concha looks down at her own left wrist. The crescent on her wrist is the correct crescent. The wax is cool. The petal that landed an hour ago is still pressed into the curve. But on her wrist, on the inside, on the warm side, there is a second crescent, smaller, fresher, almost still soft. It is in the shape of a drop that has fallen onto a wrist and cooled there. She did not feel it land. She does not remember tilting the candle far enough for a drop to land on her own inside wrist. The drop she tilted the candle to give was not given to the woman to her right. The drop she tilted the candle to give was given to her. She looks at her cousin's face. Her cousin is still smiling, the small worried smile, the que orgullo smile, waiting for Concha to make whatever face one makes when one has finished a promesa for the 11th year. Concha makes the face. She is 41 years old. She has walked the procession 8 times. She has carried the candle 8 times. She has come home from each procession with 1 crescent on the outside of her left wrist. She has, this year, come home with 2, she thinks. The saint did not release me. The saint added someone to me, she thinks. I did not look right, she thinks. I do not know who I am carrying. The bells of the cathedral finish their ring. The square quiets. The paso is being lowered onto its stands by the 48 invisible men, who will emerge from underneath it now, in a moment, wet with sweat and blinking in the light, and the crowd will applaud them, and the procession will be over, and the cofradia will gather in the chapel office, and Don Esteban will open the ledger and write the date, and the widows will meet in Doña Amparo's kitchen and pair counts, and the count will be off, and the cofradia will be told, and the ledger will not match. Concha walks home with her cousin through the side streets, the long way, the way the family always takes, past the bakery, which is closed now for the afternoon, past the school, which is empty, past the iron balcony of the Casa de las Camelias, where Doña Amparo is still standing with her 3 sister widows, and Doña Amparo's eyes are on Concha as Concha passes underneath, and Doña Amparo says softly, the way one speaks to a child one has watched grow up, "Conchita, hija," and Concha looks up. Because she is permitted to look up now, the procession is over. The looking is no longer graceless, and Doña Amparo says eran 7. There were 7. Concha nods. Doña Amparo says cada año hay una más. Each year there is one more. Concha nods. Doña Amparo says tu madre lo sabía. Your mother knew. Concha walks on. Her cousin has not heard. Her cousin is ahead, 3 paces, pulling Concha gently by the elbow, eager to be home. Eager for the cold tortilla and the wine and the long sit-down in the cool of the kitchen, and Concha allows herself to be pulled, and she does not look back at the balcony, and she does not look at her own wrist. And she does not, although she could now, although it is permitted, although the looking is no longer graceless, ask her cousin whether Pilar Ojeda was at the morning mass. She walks home. She climbs the 4 steps to her own front door. She unlocks the door. She steps inside, into the cool tiled hallway, into the smell of her own house, the orange water and the old wood, and the faint trace of the candle she had lit in the kitchen this morning, before she left, and which had burned down while she was walking. The candle in the kitchen is out. The wax in the small saucer beneath it has cooled. She walks past it. She goes to the dining room. She opens the cabinet. She takes down her mother's candle, the one with the long crescent of her mother's wrist still pressed into the side, and she carries it to the kitchen and sets it on the table. She rolls up her own left sleeve. She has 2 crescents on the outside of her wrist now, one from this year, one continuous with last year's. She turns her wrist over. On the inside, on the warm side, there is the new one, the small fresh one, the one she did not feel. She holds her wrist next to her mother's candle. The crescent on her mother's candle, the long pressed shape on the side of the wax, has the curve of her mother's wrist exactly, the shape Concha has known all her life. But there is another shape on her mother's candle, smaller, on the inside curve. She had never noticed it before. She had never turned the candle over. She turns it over now. Her mother had 2 crescents too. She sits down at the kitchen table. The cold tortilla is on a plate on the counter, covered with a clean dish towel, the way her cousin had left it for her. She does not eat it. She sits with her wrist against her mother's wrist, the wax against the skin, the cool against the cool, and she waits. She waits for the 3rd tap, the small dull bell behind her right shoulder, the one that stopped at the cathedral door. It does not come. It is in the room with her. It has come home. It is sitting at the kitchen table, in the chair her son sat in last Christmas, in the chair her Uncle Tomas used to sit in the chair her mother had sat in for 40 years, and it is not making any sound at all because it does not need to anymore, because Concha is no longer walking, because she has handed the candle to the priest, because the procession is over, because the saint has added someone to her, and the someone is here, and the someone is not loud, and the someone is not asking for anything, and the someone is. Concha understands now, fully, with the clase she had been pushing away for 4 hours. The someone is waiting to be carried, and the carrying is not a thing she does once a year on the 3rd Sunday of June. The carrying is the rest of her life. She does not cry. Promiseras do not cry on the day of the procession. That is for tomorrow. That is for the kitchen, alone when the cousin has gone home, and the wax on the wrist has set, and the house is quiet, and the candle on the kitchen table has been put back in the cabinet next to her mother's. She sits at the table. She thinks of her son, in Madrid, in front of the small television, having watched her pass, second from the right, in the 3rd row, and having said to his girlfriend, "That's her," and having returned to whatever they were doing before, and having not known what his mother is sitting with at the kitchen table. She thinks, "I will not tell him." She thinks, "My mother did not tell me." She thinks, "Doña Amparo will tell me tomorrow, or the day after. When she comes for the visit, she always comes for after the procession, and Doña Amparo will say one of the names, and I will know one of them," she thinks, but not the other. She sits at the kitchen table. The afternoon light through the window has begun to gold. The bells of the cathedral, far away across the town, ring the 4 o'clock. The procession is officially over. The cofradia has gone to the chapel office. Don Esteban has opened the ledger. The widows are in Doña Amparo's kitchen. The count is being reconciled. It will not reconcile. She sits at the kitchen table. She is alone. She is not alone. She picks up her mother's candle, and she runs her thumb along the inside curve, along the small 2nd crescent she had not known was there, and she thinks she can feel. But she is not sure. The wax is 41 years old, and the room is warm. She thinks she can feel the shape of her own name pressed into the wax, in the small handwriting her mother used when she labeled jars. She sets the candle down. She goes to the cabinet. She opens the drawer at the bottom, the one she has not opened in 11 years, the one where she keeps the small things from the hospital in Granada. The band the baby wore on his ankle, the band the other baby wore on hers, and the piece of paper on which Concha had written, on the night of the vow, the saint's name and the promise, and her own name and her son's name, and, in a different hand, smaller, almost not there, the name she had given the daughter who had not lived past the first hour. She takes out the paper. She lays it on the kitchen table next to her mother's candle. She does not look at it. She does not need to. She knows the name. She has known the name for 23 years. The name has been hers and hers alone, and it has not been spoken aloud in this house or any other house. And it has been the small white interior shape she has not unfolded. She thinks. The saint heard me anyway, she thinks. I was carrying her already. I have been carrying her for 23 years. The candle was always heavier. She thinks. The procession only showed me. She rolls down her sleeve. She covers both crescents. She gets up from the table. She puts her mother's candle back in the cabinet. She puts the piece of paper back in the drawer. She closes the drawer. She washes her hands at the kitchen sink. The cold water is cold. The soap is the soap she always uses. The towel is the towel that has hung on the same hook for 12 years. She dries her hands. She goes to the window. The street outside is quiet. The procession is over. The town is in its long afternoon. The shutters closed. The dogs asleep in the doorways. Somewhere, a radio is playing softly. A voice describing the procession that has just ended, the cofradia's announcement of the Paso's return, the formal closing of the day. She looks at her own reflection in the dark glass of the window. She looks for a long time. She is alone in the reflection. She is not alone in the room, she thinks. Next year I will carry her in the line, she thinks. Next year I will not look right, she thinks. Next year the candle will be heavier still, she thinks. And the year after that, perhaps my son will see me on his television, second from the right, in the third row, and he will turn to his girlfriend and say, "That's my mother, that's her," and he will not know, and that is what I have been walking for, that he will not know. And the saint has accepted it, and the saint has accepted me, and I have been received, and there is no taking it back. She turns from the window. She goes back to the kitchen table. She sits down. She eats the cold tortilla. It is good. Her cousin has made it correctly, with the onions cooked slow, the way her mother used to make it, the way her grandmother used to make it. She eats it slowly. She drinks the wine her cousin left. She wipes her mouth with the cloth napkin. She folds the napkin. She sets it on the table. She places her left hand on the table, palm up, sleeve still down. She places her right hand over her left wrist. She sits with the warmth of her own hand on her own two crescents. She waits. The afternoon goes by. The light in the kitchen lengthens, gold to amber to long red. The bells ring the 5 and the 6. The radio in the street stops. The town begins, slowly, to wake from its siesta, and the first voices return to the street, and the first shutters begin to open, and somewhere a child is laughing. Concha does not move from the table. She is not waiting for anything to happen. She is keeping someone company.